Okay, just checking to see if you can see me and hear me okay. There's always a problem with something, but let me know if you can see me and hear me. Just say hello, let me know where you're at, and let me know that everything is okay on your end. All right, perfect. Let's see. Okay. Perfect. Hey, Mark, how you doing, bud? So Mark is here. Just say hello from wherever you are, and then we'll get started. So welcome to Monday Guitar Motivation. Today what we're going to be doing is, hey, Vincent, hey, Steve, hey, Akava, hey, Robert. We're going to be talking about a bunch of different things over the next month to 6 weeks to try and develop some of your technique. So this is going to be fun. Hey, Chester, Lailakara, good morning from Miami. How you doing? I don't know if I said that right. I apologize if I didn't. Let's see here. Chester Allen is here. Edward is here. It's Best Strings is here. Vartan is here. We've got all kinds of people. This is great. Okay, cool. Well, I'm glad everything's working. I'm glad you can see me and hear me okay. Hey, Christopher. Christopher Patterson is here. So let's go ahead and get started so I don't take too much of your time today. Hey, Grant. Zoha. St. Eugene is here. Very, very cool. All right, awesome. Darren is here. How you doing, bud? Yeah, this is the Silver Sky SE. Pretty cool. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get started. What we're going to be talking about today, and then we're going to build on over the subsequent next few Mondays, is bending, vibrato, different kinds of techniques like that, really trying to develop these sorts of things, okay? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the proper execution of vibrato today. That's what we're going to be focusing on. So you might already do vibrato great, and that's awesome. But if you have any questions about it, that's what we're going to be doing today. So vibrato to me is one of the most important things that you can learn to execute effectively because it really makes your guitar playing sound more professional, if you will, more authentic. And if you don't do it right, it tends to sound less professional. You know what I mean? Hey, Edgar. Hey, Felix. Hey, Baldemar. Thank you so much for being here, everybody. So if we think about it, let's just talk about the vibrato itself. What happens in a vibrato is we're taking a pitch and we're bending it, and then we're releasing it back to where it was. So if you think about it, if this was our pitch, just a static sound, what happens is when we do a vibrato, we're changing the pitch, and then we're going back to that static sound, and we're making this nice, smooth waveform like this. Hey, James. Hey, Scott. Hey, Marcos. Just like that. And so when we play on guitar, the goal is to try and find the best way possible to be able to get a nice, smooth motion to that vibrato. So if you think about it, what I'm going to do here is, let's just go to the 5th fret of the 3rd string here, this C right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that note, hey, Kelly, and we're going to talk about the basics of how to create that vibrato, and then we're going to go a little bit deeper into that today. So the first thing we have to understand is when we do this vibrato, what's happening, and again, I'm the last person to tell you that there's only one way to do things, because that's not true at all. But there is, in my opinion, a better way than other ways to do this. So when I do this, what I'm not doing is taking my fingers and just doing this, okay? I'm not squeezing my fingers to make the vibrato to change that string pitch, okay? I'm not just taking my finger and trying to do this, because there's not as much control on that. If you think about it, really, the vibrato is really coming from your wrist. And if you think about it, it's almost like opening a doorknob, okay? That's almost kind of what you're doing. So I'm going to show you a couple of different approaches here, and then we'll just kind of keep working from there. Hey, Jersey, Rusty here from New Jersey. That's awesome. Danny's here from Alabama, and JR's here from North Carolina. Hey, everybody. Andy is here. How you doing, bud? So what I want you to do, if you have your guitar available, if you don't worry about it. We'll get into it later. But what we're going to do here is we're going to grab onto that guitar, okay? So what I'm doing is I'm coming from underneath the guitar. I'm literally grabbing onto the guitar like this, okay? So this part of my finger is touching the bottom of the guitar. So I'm not like this, okay? I'm literally grabbing on and my thumb is coming over the top, okay? This is the starting point, and then what we'll do is we'll keep building into this. So what happens then is if I think about it, when I play that string, that's my static pitch, okay? That's the standard pitch I want. And my two choices for vibrato is either I'm going to pull toward the floor, which is going to raise the pitch, or I'm going to push toward the ceiling, which is going to raise the pitch. No matter what I do, I'm raising the pitch. Now for me, I have a tendency of wanting to pull the string toward the floor. That's what feels most comfortable for me. You might want to push toward the ceiling, and that might feel more comfortable for you, and that's okay, all right? But if you grab onto the guitar and you think about it, what I'm not doing is doing this, okay? What I'm doing is turning the wrist. So if I think about it with the finger here touching the bottom of the guitar, and then I'm grabbing on. Now I'm going to let go of that string just for a second so you can see how this would work. Notice how when I turn my wrist, like I'm opening a doorknob, when I turn my wrist, my first finger, which was here, is now here. Now I would never do a vibrato that wide. I don't even know that I physically could do that. But that's the idea, is that I'm turning like this. So this part of my finger is kind of grinding against the bottom of the guitar neck there. As I turn, I'm pulling that string with me. Okay? So I am in control of how wide I want that vibrato to be with the turn of my wrist, which has a lot more control, a lot more strength and control than just doing this with my finger, okay? Doug says, are you holding your string and it looks like you are shaking while your guitar? I am not shaking the guitar, although that's a natural occurrence, and we'll get into that in just a little bit, Doug, okay? So we'll talk about that too. So let's not worry about let's think that the neck is, it doesn't move, right? It just sits here. Hey, Scott, how you doing, buddy? Scott Lee is here. Nice to hear from you, buddy. So as I turn, don't worry about the neck at this point, okay? Make the vibrato happen with your control, okay? So as I turn my wrist, I'm pulling that string. And then the key here is when I release it, it's going back to that static tone, okay? I don't want to, again, if I play this note, when I bend it, when I pull that string, I need to come back to that sound. If I bend it and hold it up here, it's just going to be out of tune. It's going to sound like a dying cat, right? Or something weird like that. Hey, Martin. Hey, Edward. Hey, Louis. Thank you, everybody, for being here. So I don't want that. What I need to make sure is that that pitch, when I pull that string, the pitch comes back to flat, to static, we can call it, okay? So we want to pull that and then bring it right back to static. So again, don't worry about how fast it is and all this other stuff. All you want to do in the beginning is just develop pulling that string and then releasing it back to static. And as you get comfortable with that, and again, don't worry about how wide it is. Just understand all you're doing is you're creating stress on that string, which is raising the pitch, and then you're bringing it back. And then you're going to create stress on that string again, and then bring it back. And what you want to do is you want to keep trying to develop that. So you're creating 2 points, your static point and your stress point or your bent point. And what you're going to try and do is go back in between these 2 points over and over and over, again, to create this really smooth waveform. So it's not how wide it is, it's not how fast it is, all that sort of thing. All you want to do, Corey, it's your birthday. Well, happy birthday, Corey. That's really awesome. So I want to create a nice, smooth vibrato by simply pulling that string, even just a little bit, and then bringing it back between those 2 points. Okay? Now again, that's way more control than trying to go Okay? So just think about that. Again, if you do this when you do vibrato, it's completely different than what I do. It doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong, but I would definitely try and learn how to do this a little bit more. Learn how to gain your control from your wrist and your forearm, more where you have more muscle and control of stability to be able to get that vibrato. So the pivot point is the bottom of the index finger and not the thumb. The bottom of the index finger. Well, right now I'm using my index finger. I could use any finger, right, which we'll get to. I could use any finger to create this. That's the point. So even if I was doing my pinky, I would have more fingers on there, but I would still be doing the same thing. And again, at this point, I'm grinding against the top of my finger like that as I pull that string down like this. Okay? What's the difference between this technique and using the vibrato arm? Well, the vibrato arm will give you a vibrato, but it's going to sound a little different, right? I use a vibrato or the whammy bar for a vibrato as well, but it's not going to sound the same. It's going to sound a little different. And again, you'll notice, Martin, as we keep going here, all the different things that I can do with this vibrato. And then again, over the next month or so, we're going to be talking about all kinds of different things. I just want to get you set up with the basics this week. So, as I'm doing this, okay, I'm creating those 2 points, back and forth. So, the first step of this now, as I develop this, is understanding that I have a control over how wide I want this vibrato to be. And I can choose depending on the song, depending on the style, depending on the tempo. Those things might dictate what speed or what width I want this vibrato. Now, do I want a slower vibrato? Okay, so that's the next thing, is we have the width, how wide that vibrato is. The next thing is the speed of that vibrato. So I can control how wide it is and how fast it is at the same time. Okay? So as it gets wider, of course, it's going to get a little more exotic, right? Okay? Why is it when push up the string gets numb? Why is it when push up the string gets numb? Not sure what you mean by that, and I'm not sure what's getting numb. So if you can explain that a little bit further, that would be great. So if that kind of makes sense. Now again, if you've never done much of this and you start doing vibrato, obviously you're going to start grinding on the fingertip, right? Whatever it is that's grabbing onto that guitar string, it's going to make a difference. The thicker those strings are, the more aggressive it's going to be on your finger, right? The more muscle you're going to need to be able to create a wider vibrato. If your strings are thinner, then obviously it's going to be easier to create a wider vibrato with less tension, right? So yeah, circular we'll get to in a little while. Circular is more of a natural thing. People don't really start off learning vibrato trying to create circular vibrato. It's just something that happens. Bending Stanlin we'll get to over the next month. That's all part of the conversations that we'll be having. So yeah, so again, don't start on phase 10. Start on phase 1 and then just keep kind of trying to build as you go. So as I'm doing this, and Raffel again is said how to bend a string and then do a vibrato. We're going to be talking about all of those things. If you join me over the next 4 to 5 weeks on Mondays, we're going to be talking about all these things, okay? So I'm deciding how wide I want it. I'm deciding how fast I want that, okay? Now, the next thing I can do with those two things is I can create a variety. I might decide to go something like this. Now, again, you'll notice I'm on my third finger this time, okay? Doesn't change anything. I'm still moving like this. Okay, it's just if I'm on my third finger, I might add 1 or 2 other fingers onto this to help stabilize it with more comfort and more control, right? I can use any finger I want as I play. So you'll never see me do this. Like I'll never do that, okay? You'll see me put my fingers on there. And again, depends on what works for you, right? As long as your vibrato sounds professional and you have control over it, whatever's working for you is going to work. Okay? Now, if I was to do something that has variety, I might do something like this. See how I can make it more, we can call it irregular or erratic, but it sounds pretty cool, right? So if I'm going, and then I do something like this, you see, I can make it however I want. So step one, control. Your wrist placement, your finger placement. Once you get all that, you start developing the motion of the vibrato between the 2 points. Then you move on to how wide it is and creating that. Again, the thinner your strings are, the easier it's going to be to go wider if you choose to. What string gauge is better? It depends on what works best for you. The thinner the string is when you first start, the easier it is to try and do some of these techniques. But listen, if you're 6'6" and you have really huge hands, 10s probably don't feel very heavy, you know, where if you're 5'5" and you have really small hands, maybe 10s feel a little bit too thick, right? It just depends on what works best for you. But just understand that as you're doing this, okay, the thicker that string is, the harder it's going to be to make a wider vibrato because you're creating so much more tension, okay? So if your vibrato with your first finger still works as a bevel. It sure does. Yep, it sure does, okay? So that's the first step, is development of all of that stuff. So don't worry about how fast it is. Don't worry about how wide it is, all that sort of thing. Just get used to the actual technique of it. Then start developing those 2 points. The first 2 steps are the most important. Learning to grab onto the guitar properly and turn like you're opening a doorknob and gain control of that, regardless of whether it's fast or slow, wide or not, doesn't really make any difference. And the second step is creating those 2 points. The static point, which is the string itself, the note that you're playing, and then the stress note, which is how wide you're bending it, right? I mean, because that's really what you're doing is bending it, right? You're pulling that string to a certain point, and then you're relieving it or releasing it, and then pulling it back to that point. And you need to get used to those 2 points so you create a nice, smooth vibrato. And that's where the width and the speed will come in, is you decide whether or not you want the vibrato to be this wide, or you want it to be this wide, or you want it to be this speed while that wide, or you want it to be this speed while that wide. It's all up to you, okay? So if I go to my third finger, my other 2 fingers are just acting almost like anchors, right? They're just there to kind of help the movement. Okay? Now, you can also decide that you'd rather bend toward the ceiling. You could push toward the ceiling. There's nothing wrong with that either if that works better, but this is what you have to be careful of. This is your static pitch. What you want to be careful of is that you don't go this direction toward the floor and then this direction toward the ceiling, because you're going to get this really awkward thing because it never comes back to the static pitch. You just keep jumping over and it sounds like you're out of tune the whole time. It sounds like you're calling whales, right? So you have to be careful about that, all right? So it doesn't matter whether you're pushing or you're pulling that string. Just make sure that you always come back to the static pitch. That's what you want, okay? So if that makes sense, then you start developing the width and the speed, and then you can decide to do some of the other things, which are the last 3 things I want to explain to you. The first one is creating variety. Variety. That's a great word, though. Creating variety in your vibrato, okay? Maybe we'll just start using variety as a new thing, okay? Okay? And the next thing, which I think is really important, is deciding when to add the vibrato onto a pitch. Let's say you play a phrase and you get to the end, okay? Yeah, Darren, we should get shirts that say that. Variety. It's like sobriety for guitar players. Variety, okay? So as we're playing, we decide whether or not we want to add that vibrato right away to the note, or whether or not we want to let that note settle and then give it a vibrato, which sounds really, really nice. And again, it sounds like you're not in a hurry. So as you're playing, you see that? You can hit that, stabilize, and then start adding your vibrato, and it sounds great. Okay? Now, it doesn't mean you have to do that. You can go right in into a vibrato as well. But I find myself more often than not, I will stabilize into the note. Again, if I'm not spending any time on it, it doesn't really make any difference because I got to get going anyway. But the important thing is deciding whether or not you want to hang out for a little while. And letting the note stabilize first and then adding the vibrato just gives a different kind of effect and makes it a little more dynamic when you play. You see? So it's pretty cool that you can do that too. And then the last thing I want you to talk to you about is deciding whether your vibrato is going to mimic the tempo of the music or whether it's going to do its own thing. And if you think of singers like Jeff Tate, or people with a really wide vibrato, might be Bruce Dickinson from Iron Maiden, whoever it is that you like to listen to, whoever has a vibrato that you enjoy. Think about when they sing whether or not that vibrato matches the song, matches the tempo, or whether or not it's its own thing. And that's something to think about a little bit when you're playing. So when you hear a song and you're doing your thing, you might decide that that rhythm is going to mimic that, or whether or not it's just going to do, do its own thing. And it's okay either way, but just be aware of those. So one more time to recap today. We've talked about wrist and finger, hand placement, that sort of thing, developing those two pitches, the static pitch and then the stress point, right? And developing a movement back and forth between those. Then we start dictating whether or not we want a certain width to it, a certain speed to it, and then creating variety, which is our vibriety, right? So variety. Deciding whether or not we want it to be the same all the time or whether we want to do different things at different points in time. The next thing, which I think is really important, is when you're playing a phrase and you decide to add a vibrato, whether or not you're going to add it immediately or whether or not you're going to pause and let it sit a little bit and then start adding that, okay? And then finally, whether or not you're doing your vibrato in time to the music or whether you're doing your own thing. So if that makes sense, that's what we're going to focus on this week. Now, next week, let me look. We're going to talk about string bending. Now, there's a number of different things that we need to talk about, so we're going to spend a couple of different weeks talking about different kinds of bends. And yes, we are going to talk about bending and vibrato and developing those two things at the same time, okay? So if that makes sense, we have a number of different things that we'll talk about over the next month in developing all of these different things. So this week, what I'd really love for all of you to do is focus on your vibrato itself and really just the basics of it. The most important thing is don't be in a hurry, okay? Don't just try and do everything really fast. Really try and think about the technique of what you're trying to do and then listen and feel what it is that you're doing with that vibrato. Because I think so often as guitar players, we're just in a hurry, right? We're panicking because there's so many things to think about and we're trying to play whatever's happening, that we don't think about the quality of what we're doing. So with a vibrato, don't worry about whether or not you're doing stuff fast. Just worry about whether you're doing it well, and then start deciding whether or not you want your vibrato to be wider or you want your vibrato to be, smaller or faster or whatever it is that you'd like, okay? So next week, we're going to be talking about bends. The week after, we're going to be continuing on some different topics of bends because there's tons of different kinds of bends, and I don't want to throw 50 things at you in 20 to 30 minutes. I want to throw just a few for the week, and then you can develop those, and then the next week we can talk about a bunch of other stuff, okay? So hopefully you'll join me next Monday. We'll keep going. If you get a chance, head over to GuitarZoom at guitar-zoom.com. Check out the guitar courses, check out the membership, that sort of thing. If you did join me for the webinar last night, the 6-week soloing webinar, the thing that we've got coming up, thank you so much for being there with me. I appreciate that. And otherwise, check it out, share, like, do all that kind of stuff. I sure do appreciate your help in any of those sorts of things. And most importantly, stay positive and keep practicing. All right, everybody?